And welcome back to another episode of How's the Market. This week, we're going back to back episodes on underquoting. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes that have come out in Victoria over the last couple of weeks in regards to this. And last week, we were talking about the changes to the comparable sales that must be used when creating the quoted range. But just announced, the Victorian government has stated that from May next year, agents will be required to publish the vendor's reserve 7 days prior to the auction or the EOI campaign closing date. So this will be fairly massive for everyone involved. Don't you think, James?
Oh, it's a big shake-up. Definitely last week. Oh, it's a couple of weeks ago that they announced the changes to underquoting. So they're set in stone. But this is a notification from the government to say we're changing it further. And this is one of the things about the current government, and not to get all political, but when you're reading the article, it's Australian first. You know what I mean? They're after this like PR stunt
Yeah.
to like really shake up the industry, saying, look what we're doing, look what we're doing. And maybe it's to move the eyeballs from other things that are going on in the state that we don't need to talk about because we've done an episode on that as well. But yeah, it's, I don't know, mate. The amount of consult that goes on, it doesn't seem like there's much with the industry. Who is the industry representative going in there and speaking about this stuff? Because to me, it's just never well thought. It almost sounds like a Queensland, again, not throwing Queensland or bringing Queensland politics into it, but they tend to do things that we haven't done or that we've done, and then they try to do the opposite. So yeah, it's like something that they've not really thought about, and then they've just put it out there and see what the reaction is.
My guess would be that this hasn't been created by anyone in the real estate industry if I had to have a stab in the dark, but I don't know. Because the other thing as well, and this is probably going to be a really big point for around this episode, and I will do a brief market update in a second as well, but just from my initial response to this is that it's just created way too many questions around how is this actually going to be implemented? What is it actually going to look? We need way more definitive policy and specifics on the actual rollout and implications of the changes, which they just haven't done yet. It's just a half-baked idea that they've said, "Hey, this is coming, yay, we've fixed underquoting," and then left it as that. But and we'll discuss it in today's episode. We spoke to real estate agents. I've spoken to some mortgage brokers as well, and also just some opinions from other buyers agents in the industry and what their typical thoughts on it. So we'll get into all of that. But just briefly, quick market update. Had the biggest auction weekend, the second biggest auction weekend of the year last week, which is the 16th of November. 1,703 auctions occurred and fairly weak auction clearance rate, 47.3%, which is down slightly from the previous week, which was 49.1%. Now,
That's interesting.
Yeah, and for the top end of the market, above 1.5, in just the Burundara, Stonington, Port Phillip, and Yarra, there were 69 auctions that took place with a slightly higher clearance rate of 50.72%. So top end of the market performed slightly better than the lower end. Now, that is actually really important for the underquoting laws. And I think when we're talking about changing the rules for auctions, understanding what the actual clearance rates are is very, very relevant because if you're thinking, I think when people think about underquoting, and maybe if you're in the government thinking about underquoting, you're thinking about all of the media articles that get released that say this property was quoted 1 to 1.1 and it sold for 1.5. This is what's happening everywhere. It's the real estate market's burning and everything's stuffed. Half the properties aren't even selling. So that is a very important consideration. And one of the things that when we talk about quoting with properties is James and I obviously do vendor advocacy, where we're helping vendors make this decision about where do you quote when you're selling. And we will get inputs and feedback from agents when doing this. And the other important thing to consider is that I don't like when we're speaking to vendors and multiple different agents, I don't think any agent or on any property there has been a definitive price that agents recommend you quote it at. Pretty much every agent's different, right?
Yeah, and they're not valuers. Like they do know the market quite well, but it's what the market, that's why you bring something to auction, because it's what the market is willing to pay, right? That is literally why if a house is getting sold from a deceased estate or it's in the hands of estate trustees, they will run everything to auction because that is fair market value. That is the way to establish it. So
it's transparent.
You don't know. Yeah, and it's transparent. You don't know. I get it with the quote, and we'll no doubt discuss that. But when we're talking about a 47% clearance rate, that to me goes, the market's not that healthy. Like, what are they?
Mm.
What are they really worried about, or what are they concerned about? When, yeah, less than 50% of the properties are actually selling on market. Oh, sorry,
And so,
yeah, at auction.
to, yeah, at auction. And I think this comes down to strategy, right? When you're selling, and agents always represent the vendor. That's their fiduciary responsibility. So they always have the vendor in mind. And when we were doing vendor advocacy, I was just thinking back as an example, when we were helping with the sale of a property in Camberwell, this property was circa 2.5 in worth, right? And we had three agents through, and one agent was recommending I'd quote this 2.4 to 2.5. There was an agent that was 2.5 to 2.6, and then another agency came in and this property's got problems. I'd quote it 2.1 to 2.2, like huge difference in where it was quoted. And we thought it was worth around 2.5, and we ended up going with an agent that had a quote. I believe it was a 2.4 to 2.5. So the reserve, which is essentially at the 2.5, which is the top end of the quoted range. But why this was important for strategy for this particular property is because this particular property, we can say, wasn't perfect. In a fantastic area, worth a lot. It was a beautiful home, but if we just looked at it objectively, it didn't have car accommodation. There was no garage or carport. It was south facing. It was smaller than blocks in the area. It didn't have a walk-in robe or a master. So, and if you're paying 2.5, you probably want a couple of those things. So the typical feedback that we got was that this property has a large chance of passing in. And if it does pass in at auction and you need to negotiate, the strategy that we ended up going with is that you don't want to quote it low, because if you've got a quote that's 2.1 to 2.2 and it passes in and then you have a reserve of 2.5, then that's a really bad strategy. Whereas if you quote it higher in the auction campaign, and then if it passes in, people will at least see that the reserve was within the range and that's where they were expecting, and it's easy to negotiate after auction. So like agents are thinking about strategy from that perspective, and that needs to be put into consideration as well when you're quoting properties. And I think publishing the reserve, it's going to make a lot of changes. But just as an example of the way that agents think, I think that's one of the things that the people aren't really considering.
Yeah, for sure. It will be difficult. And is there much more in the market, Rap? Because I think we're just going to keep talking about
Let's go. Yeah.
the article yesterday. So just in terms of the differences between what you were saying on those agencies, that's exactly what we discovered when doing the calls, right? Speaking to a couple of different agents just over the last couple of days and 10 minutes before this call, and how they were viewing it. So if there is an agency that is accustomed to underquoting, because that's just their process, all right? There are a lot of them out there. I spoke to an agent yesterday and everyone thinks this is isolated to New South Wales and Victoria. It's not. I've got a property in Brisbane, spoke to the agent, and they were like, oh, yeah, look, I reckon you could get 9 for it. And they were saying, I reckon we quote it offers over 820. Offers over 820, maybe 800 to like really drive some interest, because they do offers over. But if they run an auction campaign, they actually don't even give you a price. Like, it's cooked. They will say nothing on the phone. Like, you can try it, and it's illegal for them to give you a quoted range in Queensland for an auction. Anyway, so the underquoting is real across all states, and they've got different ways of processing it. Queensland thinks that we do everything incorrectly, as I said before, so they've tried to combat that. Doesn't work, obviously, but the agents that are used to running that style of auction campaign and even EOI campaigns, it's going to affect them. Like, they're the ones that are going to be in pain, and they're the ones that are going to have to like scramble, because they're probably going to have to do more work as well. As we've established, they're probably going to have to actually get in there and guide conversations and tackle it from a different way, rather than just, quote it low, watch it go, which is exactly what one of the other agents said. And then if you look at the reverse of that, so agents that have done it the right way, you've spoken to a couple of them, Tristan, just around, the ones.
Yeah. So I'm for, like, I think obviously underquoting is a problem. And one of the agents that we were speaking with was saying that actually multiple of the agents we spoke with, we'd call them the ethical agents. That's what they refer to themselves as well. They've been in the camp that they've always had the reserve within the quoted range anyway. And one agent, it's a bit further out, they hardly do auctions because it's just less common in that market. He deals with a lot of first home buyers. But if the if he's quoting 5 to 550, the reserve will always be within that range. Usually it's 550. And if you've got a budget that's within that range, you should be there, because if it doesn't get to the top end of the range, they'll sell for within. And he's of the guys that if the quote's 5 to 550 and the reserve's 600, and you've got 3 or 4 first home buyers or just buyers in general that have gone and spent money on building and pest inspections and maybe getting the contracts reviewed, but also just getting emotionally attached to the home and thinking that they've got a chance and spending and wasting their time as well, and the reserve 600, and that's more than what their max budget is, then that is obviously a huge negative thing. And I think everyone can agree that underquoting in those circumstances and scenarios is just a negative thing. If the vendor was never going to accept anything within 5 to 550 and the reserve is 6, and they were only going to accept offers at 6 or above, then it's a bad idea. And then even for the agent that we spoke with 5 minutes ago, he was saying the same thing. He's like, our whole agency ethos has always been to have the reserve within the quoted range. And then he said it won't really make that much of a difference to us in terms of how we quote, but it will make a big difference into the amount of work that agents need to do, because you'll need to have much more stringent conversations with buyers in the lead up to that 7 days prior to auction, when you have to announce a reserve publicly, to get much more information as to where they are, which I think is going to be a problem for, if anything, it's going to mean buyers are getting hounded by real estate agents more, which is what I'm sure everyone wants and loves.
Yeah. And that's what we found as well. So and what we spoke about when we initially saw the article come out was the vendor's the one that's going to get hurt on this. I feel they've gone too far the other way, and they're trying to protect buyers. I get that. Look, we sit on the buyer side. We're not saying that this isn't a bad thing. I just don't think that they've thought it through. And yeah, the ones that are really going to get punished are the vendors. So in terms of that marketing and driving competition, when you've got a property that's around, it actually doesn't matter the price, but if you've got a vendor that doesn't know the value of their property, and let's just say it's $1 million, and the agents go out to the market, exactly what Tristan is saying, they've opened it up and they've got it quoted at, let's just say it's 900 to 990 or 950 to $1 million, or whatever you want to do. And they're out there speaking to a couple of the buyers that are coming through. Buyers will always say less than what they actually have. So if they've got 3 buyers that come through, agent calls them back and says, hey, what are you thinking? Like, where are you at on this property? They're going to say, oh, maybe 900. Like, you guys have got it quoted 950 to $1 million. Yeah, maybe 900. So what's the agent like? If that's a consistent message through those buyers, what does the agent go back and tell the vendor? Oh, all the interest is at 900. We just drop it to 900, like the reserve, so that we get it sold. That's the discussion that's probably going to happen. And again, that vendor is the one that's going to get penalized, because always, when we call an agent on a Friday, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Agent, where's it at? You know what I mean? Tell us where the pricing's at. Oh yeah, most people have been telling us 900, you should rock up. Like, where are you guys at? And we've obviously established value, and it'll sell for $1 million or over. You know what I mean? Everyone is 100, 200K over what they're telling the agent.
Yeah, it's literally just going to mislead the vendor. And that's the biggest question that I have is, can the reserve be updated or amended once published? Because this is what the conversation we were having with real estate agent just a few minutes ago, is that the problem is that the reserve often changes the day of the auction and throughout the auction and after the auction, which people don't know. And I don't think that gets spoken about enough. If you're a buyer, you think the reserve's a number and it's just set. But oftentimes, and this is coming into a conversation I had with an agent that is against these changes, he was saying that the reason that he thinks auctions are the best way to sell properties is because of the transparency of it all. And we always encourage bidding to start low, because you want to have more people just involved in the bidding. And then if one person drops off early, that's a very good indication of that's where one person maxed out or had that budget. And he said the reason that it's so good from the transparency perspective is that very oftentimes they'll stop in the middle of the auction, go inside, speak to the vendor and say, hey, we've got three buyers here. They're all at the bottom end of the range. Like, I know the goal for the whole campaign was to get over the range. We're here today. We were hoping to have five buyers. We've only got three or two. One of them's already stopped. We've only got two left. We're probably going to have to bring the reserve down. And quite often the reserve will change throughout the auction, the middle of the auction. Or you've got two buyers there and they're asking, is it on the market? And you're trying to encourage more bidding. So you put it on the market earlier. So you drop the reserve strategically earlier to get more information out of them. But what's also happening on the other side is that middle of the auction, agents and the auctioneer goes in and speaks to the vendor. Hey, we've only got one buyer here. They're just doing vendor bids against us. The property's probably going to pass in. Let's increase the reserve so that when we pass into them, we give them a higher reserve and they can negotiate us down and we try to meet in the middle. And that is just a negotiation strategy that agents and auctioneers do in order to protect the vendor and try to get the highest property price for them. And so is that all just going to be scrapped? Like, we're completely getting rid of all of these changes now. That's like a major thing. And so I don't agree with this because it's going to put the vendor into worse circumstances. They're going to have to make decisions with less information, which is the opposite of what they've currently got at the moment. And vendors don't know the market in most times. They're not valuers themselves. They're just vendors. They just live in the home. And plus, it's just going to be way more paperwork for the vendor as well. So we're going to have to get them to sign all of these documents. And I just think that they've gone way too over the top with the amount of rules. And I'd literally rather them just get rid of the quota range completely. And it's just completely up to the market, not what the vendor is dictating or what the agents are or what the buyers are willing to disclose to the agent 7 days or more prior. It's just so much messier now.
Yeah, it's so messy, man. And like, again, I feel for the vendor, and there's people still dodge this shit, right? Like, no matter what you put out there, people are still going to figure out a loophole to dodge this, right? Like,
For sure.
it is what it is. And people need to do their research on who they're buying from. Like, we know, like we call internally, and we have a book as well. Like, we have a list of agents that we know, hey, these guys are dodgy. They are going to tell us everything. Like, you and I talk and it's, oh yeah, that fucking guy. We're definitely going to put it at this point. Or if they're saying 7 to 770, we know that they probably want 900 for it. They're there. And when you know the market and you've done your research on the market, so buyers and sellers, this is why if I'm in the buyer's camp, why you need to go and do your research, why you need to go and speak to agents, why you need to see how things sell. And you will see patterns. If you go to 5 different agencies, no matter where you are, you will see different patterns in how things are sold. Yeah, we work in the East and we see it time and time again. Like, we could just reel off people that we know and from different agencies as well. There are some boutique agencies that it's very consistent and it's like a no bullshit policy, you're out. And then you've got some other ones where they're a little bit more cowboy. So that's on the buyer's side. And then on the vendor side, you need to do the same thing. You just have to do your research. I'm just sitting here thinking, talking to you, there almost needs to be, because REIV, REIA, like, they're all irrelevant. No one cares about if you're REIV approved or like you're an REIV member, because they'll just take any member. Someone needs to come up with a approval process. So certified, you know what I mean? Like, this number is certified. So Tommy's certified number to go to auction or to, put out there into the marketplace, that there has to be some certification or verification done if they really want to, make this make it work, really. And then that can even go back to, we've spoken about it as in an industry. So I come from the development world. A lot of developers, a lot of builders go bankrupt. So having some sort of verification on their financials, everything in the back end, so that people trust who they're dealing with. So it's no different. The more policies, the more regulations that come in, the more people that, are dodgy in the industry, there has to just be some external certification, verification on what the numbers are. I really only see that being the way forward.
Yeah, mate, I agree. And if I was an agent and I was saying to my vendor, like, hey, I want to get you the best price, and I really think that we should underquote this property just to bring some attention in, I don't think it solves underquoting. Like, this, you could still underquote. And one of the examples is if the vendor wants 2 mil for the property or a mil or whatever, say they want 2 mil, and you've got this 4 week auction campaign, you could just start the quote, you could advertise it at 1.7 to 1.8 and then get all of these buyers through in the first couple of weeks because they think that the reserve's going to be between 1.7 to 1.8. And then after 2 weeks, you're like, wow, like we've had 40 groups through that have said that they're willing to bid. We've decided we're going to increase the quote the week of auction, and all of a sudden the reserve's published at 2 mil, but you've just had 40 buyers through have already maybe got contracts reviewed and everything else. So you can still do it. Or if they're going to make it that you can still change the reserve, you just publish a low reserve 1 week out, and then on auction day, it's like, hey, vendors changed their mind. Turns out there was 12 people that registered, so we've increased the reserve, which it should be their right.
Because that's the other thing that you found as well is you can't force a vendor to sign the contract.
Correct.
So, yeah, do you want to run through that?
So that's very important. And this is what multiple agents have said to me, that even if bidding on the day reaches the reserve price and the auctioneer declares that it's on the market, you can't force the vendor to accept that offer and or sign that contract. They can declare publicly that it's meet their reserve price and that it's an acceptable offer, but you can't force them to sign that contract. And agents have told me that this has happened where it's reached the reserve price and then all of a sudden the vendors have got cold feet, changed their mind, or someone else has come in last minute after the bidding's finished. And I was looking through some legal articles regarding this, and essentially, yeah, the vendor has full discretion. They're not legally obliged to sign the contract, and the property's not actually sold if it's not exchange contracts with the deposit paid. So the agents just said, I think there's going to be a lot more of that. The agents are going to be saying, let's put a low reserve, and then if it doesn't get significantly above the reserve that's advertised, the vendors are just going to be like, oh, look, no, I actually changed my mind. I don't want to sell. And you can't force them to. So unless the laws change around that, where you're trying to force vendors to accept offers, then it's just going to be another way to underquote. And I was thinking just on this as well, like how often vendors don't understand their property's value. And that's just so important, because what you're doing is you're trying to force the vendors to have a proper understanding of the market and maybe trust the real estate agents or whatnot. But I remember just thinking about this now, a conversation I had with some agents, and he was telling me how his campaign just got blown up. Like they did the full thing. They paid for proper marketing. They've got a really good video. I think they quoted this property 2 to 2.2, and he's on auction day. The vendor gave them a reserve of 2.45, and he was telling them the whole time that it's worth 2.2, and they had 2.2. But what happened is the vendor told me that their accountant called them up the day before auction and said, don't sell for anything less than 2.45. Now, the accountant doesn't know anything about the market. He hasn't seen the property. He hasn't been through it. He was just there looking at some numbers online. Maybe he saw the median house price of the suburb and said, yeah, don't sell for less than 2.45. And then the vendor, having this very poor information, has set a reserve. And then what happened is the agents just said it's not worth that. And so they just took it off market. Agent didn't sell it. No result was had. Vendor just held it. And it's just how vendors they're not sworn valuers. They don't know really what their property's worth to be able to set an educated and strategic reserve in order to get them the best outcome possible. So I just think...
But no one does. That's why valuers go off the sales. You know what I mean? Like a valuer will still have a threshold or a tolerance level in terms of how they're valuing a property. But the best way that they value properties is to look at comparables that have sold. You know what I mean? So if the market is going to pay $800,000 for a property and everyone thought it was going to get $750, or even the other way, if they thought they were going to get $850 for it and it sells for $800, that is what the market is willing to pay for it. That is what cooks my head on this stuff around, them trying to, almost set a price that is like a retail shop amount. So does this mean that they're going to go and look at car sales? And I bought a new car recently. They put a sticker price on it. No one pays a sticker price. And I had to call 6 different dealerships to understand what the price was. And then I ended up calling a mate who used to work there. and like the same brand. And I was like, hey, is this a good price? Because I got no freaking idea. There's no transparency. That's a brand new car that is from, say, a retail shop. So many variables on price. Like it's the same product. So that's what really, yeah, where does this open it up to? If this is consumer affairs, does it just stop at the real estate market? Do they start looking at others? But anyway, I think we've spoken enough about it. It's going to be very interesting, and watch this.
There's pros and cons. There's definitely pros and cons to it, but I just think it's absolutely just a half-baked idea at the moment. And until they actually get clarity on this, and I think that as they go through the process of trying to get clarity on it, they're going to realize that there's major loopholes, potholes, and mistakes. It's either going to be like brought back or whatever it is. But yeah,
get some freaking industry like panel. I will go on the panel. Like I will go and I'll put my 2 cents in. But yeah, where is this feedback? The only issue I got from BLA or whatever it was the other day was, hey, provide feedback on the regulations around CPD points and changes are coming. So there's definitely a shakeup in the industry, which I think is good. I'm all for CPD points and keeping the industry regulated to a degree. But yeah, get some industry feedback.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks everyone for tuning in to How's the Market. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave us a quick review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps more people find the show. And for this one, I know it's obviously a bit controversial, but reach out. I'm curious to hear what people are thinking about this from buyers and listeners and mortgage brokers and other agents. We might keep updating this as we go, and I'm sure that this is going to be a conversation that comes up in the coming months again as it all unravels. But until next week, we'll catch you guys then. See ya.